Hilchos Avodah Zarah Perek Shvi'i. Laws of Idol Worship, Chapter 7. Today's topic is all about the prohibition to use things that are associated with idol worship. Halacha Aleph Mitzvat Asehi. It is a positive commandment la'abed avodat kochavim u'mishamsheha v'chol hana'aseh bishvila, to destroy idols, their accessories, and anything that was made for it. Shene'emar, as it says, abed ta'abdun et kol ha'mekomot. You shall surely destroy all the places. That's a reference to the places where they served idols. V'ne'emar, and it also says, ki imkot ha'asu lahem. This is what you should do to them. Mizbechotehem titotzu. Crush their altars. However, it says the Rambam, Uve'eretz Yisrael mitzvah lirdof achareha. The mitzvah to chase it down is only in Israel. Ad shena'abed ota mikol artzeinu, till we destroy it completely from our land. Because that's the land that we own. Aval b'chutz la'aretz, but outside of Israel, ein anu mitzuvin lirdof achareha. We don't have a command to chase it down. If a Jew lives in Sherman Oaks, we don't have to go down the street and destroy every church or every idol. Ella, rather, kol makom shenichbosh oto, any place which we conquer. If the Jews do conquer a certain place outside of Israel, ne'abed kol avodat kochavim shabo, we have to destroy every idol inside it. Shene'emar, as it says, v'ibadetem et shma min hamakom hahu. You have to destroy their name from that place. Be'eretz Yisrael atam mitzuvel lirdof achareihem. Only in Israel you have to go and chase them down. V'i atam mitzuvel lirdof achareihem b'chutz la'aretz. But you don't have to go chase them down outside of Israel. Halacha bet. Avodat kochavim u'mishamsheha. The idol itself, its accessories, v'tikrovet shalah, anything that was offered to it, v'chol hana'aseh bishvila, and everything that was made for it, asur b'hana'ah. It is prohibited to have benefit from it, to use it. Shene'emar, as it says, you can't sell it either, by the way. You can't make money off it. You can't do no benefit. Shene'emar, as it says, v'lo tavi to'eva el betecha. Do not bring anything disgusting, which is a reference to Avodah Zarah, into your house. If you do have benefit from any of these things, lo keshtayim, you get two sets of lashes. Achat, one, mishum v'lo tavi, because of the prohibition we just mentioned, don't bring any idols into your house. Ve'achat mishum, and another one because of the prohibition we learned about 3 days ago, v'lo yidbak biyadcha me'uma min hacherem. When it came to the persuaded city and we destroyed the whole city, it says you can keep nothing from that which was destroyed. That's a reference also to all Avodah Zarah. So if you use anything that's related to idols, you get two sets of lashes. Over here we're going to talk about many other laws. There's also a special law called yayin nesach, wine that was offered to Avodah Zarah. That we're not going to deal with over here. That's going to be in a later book. When we deal with forbidden foods, we're going to have 3 whole chapters on yayin nesach. Here we're talking about other things. Halacha gimel behema shehikrivuha kula la'avodat kochavim. If an animal was completely offered to an idol, asura bahana'a, it is forbidden to have benefit from it. Afilu pirsha, even it's the waste inside of it. V'atzmoteha, its bones. V'karneha, its horns. V'tlafeh, its hooves. V'ora, and its skin. Hakol asur bahana'a. Everything is forbidden. Why? Because it was hikrivu hakula. The case was they offered it completely. So the commentaries say, what if the goyim offered it and they said, we only want to give the whole animal but not the horns or not the hooves. So since they didn't bring it all to Avodah Zarah, so those parts would actually be permitted. That's what the primary commentator of the Kesef Mishnah says. The other commentators argue. They say no. If the goyim brought the entire animal to the idol, even if they said, we don't want part of it to become bad, the whole thing becomes bad. Why? Because it was killed, or it was sacrificed for the idol, and the whole animal is either alive before you sacrifice it, or dead after you sacrifice it. So the whole animal gets changed by the offering. But if, let's say, they would slaughter it, stam. A guy slaughtered his cow, and then he decides, let me bring the leg to the idol. So he's only bringing part of it, then only that part becomes prohibited, not the rest of the animal. Other commentaries say the whole text here should be changed. It shouldn't say behema shehikrivuha kula, the whole animal was brought. Rather, behema shehikrivuha to Avodah Zarah kula asura bahana'a. If it was brought, then all of it is forbidden. Lefichach, says the Rambam, therefore, since the entirety of the animal becomes forbidden, im hayaba or siman, if the skin had a sign, sheyodea bo, through which you can know, shezeh ha'or tikrabet avodat kochavimhu, that this skin was offered to an idol, for example, kigon shahayu osim, like they used to do, shekorim kera agol keneged halev umotziin halev. The idol worshippers used to tear open the animal's stomach right opposite the heart and take out the heart. Some commentaries say they would do it while the animal was alive. Some say after it was dead. But the point is, this was a uniquely idolatrous custom. So you ended up, after the animal was skinned, there would be a big round hole in the middle. So any hide that would look that way with this hole in the middle, asurin b'hana'ah, they're prohibited to have pleasure from it. And so to anything similar. Halacha dalit. Even though all idols are prohibited to be used, there's a small difference whether the idol was made by a Jew or by a goy. Ma ben avodat kochavim shel oved kochavim la avodat kochavim shel Yisrael. What's the difference between an idol that was made by a goy and one that was made by a Jew? Avodat kochavim shel oved kochavim. An idol for a goy, asura b'hana'ah miyad, is prohibited to have benefit from it immediately as soon as it was made. Shene'emar, as it says, psilei Elohehem tisrifun ba'esh. The statues of their gods you shall burn in fire. How come it adds the word psilei? Could just say Elohehem tisrifun ba'esh. Burn their gods in fire. The word pesel also means sculpting. Misha pesalo na'aselo Eloha. The second he sculpts it, it becomes his god. And therefore it's prohibited as soon as you make it. Shel Yisrael, but if it belonged to a Jew, eina asura b'hana'ah ad shete'aved. It only becomes prohibited to have benefit from it once it's served. Shene'emar, as it says, one of the curses that the Jews got right after they came into Israel, they were supposed to pronounce on the two mountains. There was 11 curses and 11 blessings. One of them was arur ha'ish asher ya'aseh peselo masecha. Cursed is the man who makes an image. But then it says v'sam basater, and he puts it into hiding, which means it only becomes prohibited once he does his hidden idolatrous practices with it. Ad sheya'aseh la dvarim shebaseter shehen avodata. It's only prohibited when he does those things that are hidden, which means serving it. But the accessories of an idol, ben shaloved kochavim, ben shal Yisrael, whether they belong to a goy or to a Jew, einan asurin, they only become prohibited ad sheyishtamshu bahen la'avodat kochavim, until you use them for an idol. So the actual statue, if it's a goy, prohibited right away. If it's a Jew, wait till you serve it. But let's say you have a cap for the idol, or a ring, or a diamond, or something you put on it, that you only becomes forbidden, even if it's a goy's, once you serve it. Halacha he. Ha'oseh avodat kochavim la'achirim. This is an interesting one. If you make an idol for somebody else, so that's a prohibition. You can't make an idol even for another person. But if you did, afal pishahu lokeh, even though you get lashes, scharo mutar. The money that he pays you to make it, you can use. Va'afilu asa'a le'oved kochavim shehi asura miyad. Even if you were to make it for a goy, in which case the statue would become prohibited right away, when he pays you $1,000 for your work, you could use that money. Why? Follow this. Mipnei she'enan ne'eseret ad shetigamer. The idol itself only becomes prohibited once it's fully finished. There's a halachic principle that says that when an artist or an artisan or a professional works, you have to pay him for every moment. It's not like once he finishes the job, now you owe him all the money. At every moment that he works, you're owing him another penny, another penny, another penny. So it turns out that right before you put the last hammer into the stone, you owed him, let's say, $999.99. Then you give the last hammer stroke, now he owes you the last penny. That last hammer stroke, which made it forbidden, has no worth. Umakosh acharon shegomra, the last hit that finishes it up, ein bo shaveh pruta, doesn't have the worth of a pruta, of a small coin. The rest of the work which you did before, you get paid for. You can use that. It wasn't prohibited yet. When it became prohibited, that last step was worthless. So we don't consider it beneficial, and therefore you're allowed to derive benefit. Halokeach gerutaot min ha'oved kochavim. What if you buy scrap metal from a goy? Umatzah bahen avodat kochavim. And in the scrap, you find idols. So here, it depends whether the idols already entered your possession or not. In halacha, there's two stages to buying something. Number one, giving money. Number two, taking the object into your possession. That's called mishicha. By non-Jewish law, just pulling it, just taking it into your possession, already gives it to you. By Jewish law, you have to do both. So now says the Rambam, here we're going to jump on both sides of the fence. Im natan ma'ot v'lo mashach. If you just paid money, but you didn't yet take the idols into your possession, and you see, oy vey, there's an idol in that scrap pile, yachzirem la'oved kochavim. Just give them back to the idol worshiper, because by Jewish law, that's not a complete sale until you take it into your possession. Therefore, you can go back and retract the sale. V'chein im mashach v'lo natan ma'ot. So too on the flip side, if you only took it into your possession, you didn't yet give the money, and then you realize, oy vey, there's an idol here. Afal pisha mishicha be'oved kochavim koneh, even though by non-Jewish law, just the fact that you took it into your possession already gives you acquisition, kimikach ta'utu. Says the Rambam, it's considered like a mistaken transaction, a transaction in error. And therefore you can say, I don't want to go according to Gentile law, I want to follow Jewish law where we need both elements, and therefore I can return it. Natan ma'ot umashach. But if I gave the money and I took it into my possession, now I can't use any more excuses. It already came into my possession, and therefore, yolichem liyam hamelach. You have to take them to the Yam HaMelech, which is the Rambam's way of saying you have to destroy them. You can do anything to destroy them. As long as nobody else will benefit from it, you can. That's what you have to do. The Melech destroys it.
Will destroy it.
Exactly. V'chein, says the Rambam, similarly, another case where before the idols entered your possession, you have more power over it. Once it entered your possession, you have to destroy it. Here's another case. Oved kochavim beger. You have a goy and his brother, a converted to Judaism. Sheyarshu et avihen oved kochavim. Their father dies, and now they're inheriting his estate. Yachol hager lomar la oved kochavim. Before they divide the estate, the ger can tell his brother, the goy, tol ata avodat kochavim va'ani ma'ot. You take the idols, and I'll take money proportionate to that. Tol ata yayin nesech va'ani perot. You take the wine that's forbidden, and I'll take other produce corresponding to that. This way, he avoids getting the idols into his possession. But if they already divided the estate, and the ger is going through his boxes, and he sees, I have some idols in here, asur. Now it's forbidden, it came into his possession, we're done. Says the Rambam halacha vav. Tsurot, images. Some commentaries say it means human statues, others say it's any type of statue. Sha'asa'um ovdei kochavim lenoi, that the goyim made not for idol worship, just for beauty. They wanted to prove how artistic they are, or they wanted to, some other thing, just for beauty. Mutarin bahana'a, it's permitted to derive benefit from it. But if the images were made directly for idol worship, asurim, they are prohibited. Ketzat, what is an example of this? And here the Rambam doesn't give us an obvious example, because if you know it was made for beauty, of course it's permitted. If you know it was made for idols, of course it's prohibited. Here he talks about cases where you're not sure. Here's the rules. Kol hatsurot hanimtzaim bikfarim. Any images which you find in small villages, asurim bahana'a, are prohibited. You have to assume they were made for idols. There's an assumption they were made for idol worship. The commentators explain why. Because villagers have no artistic taste. They're simple people. They don't make things just for beauty. So if they have images, it's for idol worship. But if you find an idol, an image, in the bigger cities, in the metropolis areas, if they were standing at the entrance to the city, and in the hand of this image was a tsurat makel, was the image of a stick, or tzipor, or a bird, or kadur, or a ball, or saif, or a sword, or atara, or a crown, v'tabat, or a ring. These are all ways of displaying this idol's power. It's at the entrance of the city. It's holding something, some powerful object. Chezkatosh avodat kochavim va'asur bahana'a. The assumption is it was made for idol worship and it's prohibited. V'im la, then if it's not holding anything, or it's not at the entrance of the city, so then, because it's in a big city, you can assume it's assumed to be for beauty, and it's permitted. Why? Because the big cities, they do have artistic taste. So unless it's clear that it's for idols, it's probably for beauty and just to appreciate the artist's work. Halacha zayin. Salmei avodat kochavim hanimtzaim mushlachim bashvakim. Images of idols that are found thrown around in the market, or betoch hagrutaot, or in a pile of scrap metal, harei elu mutarin. These are permitted. Now, we just said 2 halachot ago that if you buy scrap metal from a guy and you find idols, it's prohibited. So what's the Rambam saying over here? So some commentaries say that over here we're talking about where you just find it in the street. Therefore, it's permitted. When you're buying from a guy, if somebody will see afterwards in your pile that you have an idol, he's going to think you literally went ahead and bought idols on purpose. Therefore, it's prohibited. Another commentary says that no. In the earlier halacha, we're talking about where you know the idol was served. Here, you don't know if it was served. They actually delete the words avodat kochavim. They just say tzlamim. There were images, statues in the market. So because you're not sure, and you see them thrown away, you can assume that the guy who was serving it, even if he did, nullified it, and therefore it's permitted. Needless to say, if you find broken pieces of a statue, that's for sure permitted. Because you can assume that the guy nullified it. He doesn't want to use it anymore. But if you find just a hand, a full limb, mitzurat kochav o mazal, from the image of a star or a constellation. Remember, the Goyim, they didn't know what the stars looked like, but they made up these images. They made up how it looked. And so if you find a hand, or ragla, or a foot, or evar me evareh, or any other limb, mushlach, thrown away, hareza asur bahana'a, that's prohibited. even though when it's a broken statue, it's permitted. But if it's a full limb, and you know it was attached to an idol, you have to assume that it's prohibited. Ho'il v'yada bevadai, shezeh ha'evar, min surat, avodat kochavim hane'evedet. Since you know for sure that this limb came from an image of an idol that was served, harehi bi'isura, it retains its prohibition, ad she'yivada lo sheha'ovdei kochavim ovdeha bitlu'a, until you know for sure that the goyim who served it nullified it. Some commentaries say it wasn't a hand from an idol, it was a hand that was worshipped. If it was a hand from an idol, then it would be considered broken and it would be permitted. But because it's a full hand, and the hand itself was worshipped, therefore it's prohibited. Okay, halacha chet. Hamotzei kelim. If you find articles, it doesn't just mean vessels, it means different types of utensils. Va'alehen surat chama ulevana udrakon. And on them is the image of the sun, or the moon, or a drakon. According to some commentaries, this is like a snake. According to the Rambam elsewhere, he calls this a man in the shape of a fish who has lots of scales and fins. They say here in the notes, it's like the Greek god Neptune. I'm not familiar with the Greek gods. Kind of like a mermaid. Yeah, somewhat like a mermaid. So the Rambam says, Im hayu klei kesef v'zahav o bigdei shani, if they were silver or gold or scarlet crimson clothing, so it's considered fancy. O shehayu chakukim al hanazamim v'al tabaot, or they were engraved onto nose rings or rings. Hare elu asurin, they prohibited, because it's important articles of clothing, and therefore probably the images engraved upon them were for idolatrous purposes. V'al sha'ara kilim, but if it's just on another vessel, mutarin, it's permitted, because you can assume it was made just for beauty. And also other images on any other vessel, if they're not the sun, moon, or the drakon, they can be assumed to be for beauty, and they are permitted. Halakha tet. Now we're entering a topic that's called ta'aruvot. Many times, if you have something that's prohibited and it gets mixed into other things that are permitted, there's a whole set of laws that apply to them. We're going to get much more involved in these laws when we get to the laws of ma'achalat asurot, of forbidden foods. Here the Rambam gives us in short as it relates to avodah zarah. Avodat kochavim u'mishamsheha. The idols themselves, their accessories, v'chol ha'tikrovet shelah, and anything that was brought or offered to it, osrin b'chol shehen. They prohibit other things, even at the minutest amount. Typically in Jewish law, if you have, let's say, milk and meat, they get mixed into each other. If there's 60 times more in the milk than the meat, or 60 times the meat over the milk, it becomes batel, nullified. For other laws, it's like 100 times or 200 times, but there's amounts where it can become permitted. When it comes to avodat kochavim, idol worship, doesn't matter how big the pile is, if there's the slightest doubt that there's maybe an idol in here, the whole mixture becomes prohibited. Ketzad, for example, how is this? Avodat kochavim, shemit'arva b'tzurot shel noi. You have an idol that got mixed into images made for beauty. So the idol is prohibited, the beauty images are permitted. But afilu achat bekama alafim, even if it was one in a bunch of thousands, 1 in 5,000, 10,000, yolich hakol liyam hamelach. You have to take everything to be destroyed. The thousands of images become prohibited. One cup of idol worship gets mixed into a bunch of other cups. Or one piece of meat that was offered to an idol, mixed into a bunch of other pieces of meat. Yolich hakol liyam hamelach. Everything has to go to the sea, the Dead Sea. Everything is prohibited. V'chein or lavuv. Also, if you have a hide that had a hole in the place of the heart, shenit arev bekama orot, mixed into many hides, hakol asur b'hana'ah, the entire mixture is prohibited to derive benefit from it. Avodah zarah is extremely strict. Even in other cases where we say that the entire mixture is prohibited, many times halacha allows for you to sell the whole mixture to a goy, minus the amount, the worth of that prohibited piece. Here we say it's completely prohibited. Avodah zarah is extremely strict.
Almost impossible that a Jew can drawn to that.
Well, let's say it happened. Let's say there was a massive, Avar umachar avodat kochavim. O echad mi mishamsheha. O tikrovet shelah. What if you transgressed the prohibition and you sold an idol, or you sold an accessory, or you sold a thing that was offered to it? Hare hadamim asurim b'hana'ah. The money which you got, also prohibited to have benefit from. Ve'osrin b'chol shehen. And they also prohibit other money. If you have a $100 bill you got for selling an idol, and you put it into your bank, and now it's mixed with all your money, all the money is prohibited. Ka'avodat kochavim, just like the idol. Shene'emar, as it says, v'hayita cherem kamohu. It should be cherem, which is like condemned, just like the idol. Kol ma she'ata mevi me'avodat kochavim umikol meshamsheha v'tikravta. Whatever you bring into your possession from an idol, from the accessory, from the offering, harehi kamoha, is like the idol. Halacha yud avodat kochavim o asherah shenisrifa. If you have an idol or a tree that was served as an idol and it was burned down, efra asur bahana'a. Its ash is also prohibited to have benefit from. You can't make soap from it or things like that. The gachelet shel avodat kochavim asura. A coal that was used in the service of idol worship cannot be used. V'hashalhevet muteret, but a flame is permitted. If you have a fire that's being lit for an idol, you can take your Havdalah candle and light it from the fire and go make Havdalah. You can't make Havdalah to the actual fire itself, but you can use it for another flame. Mipnei she'ein ba mamash. Why? Because it has no substance. Flame is not considered to have an entity. Now that Rambam says a fundamental rule, Safek avodat kochavim asur. If there's only a single doubt about the idols, the whole mixture is prohibited. You have one idol, falls into 1,000 other pieces, the whole thing is prohibited. Svek sveka, but a double doubt, a doubt of a doubt, mutar, is permitted. What does this mean, a doubt of a doubt? Says the Rambam Ketzad. How is this? Kos shel avodat kochavim shenafal be'otzar malei kosot. You have one cup, it falls into an entire storehouse of cups. Kulan asurin. They're all prohibited. Mipnei she'avodat kochavim v'chol meshamsheha osrin b'chol shehen. Because idols, or anything that's used for idols, prohibits the entire mixture, even at the smallest amount. However, peirash kos echad min hata'arovet v'nafal lekosot shnayim or kosot shniyim. If one cup from the mixture goes and falls into another mixture of cups, hare elu mutarim. Now that second mixture is permitted. Why? Because we say it like this. There's a double doubt. If you pick up a cup from the second mixture, you may be picking up a cup from an entirely different set of cups, which not the one that was problematic. Let's say there's 10 cups here, 10 cups here. These 10 cups have the idol cup fall into it. They're the problematic one. Now you have another cup falls into here. The cup that you pick up from here may not even have been from the original pile into which the problematic cup fell in. Even if it was from the original pile, maybe it wasn't the idol worship one. So it's a double doubt. And therefore, they're all permitted. Tabat shel avodat kochavim shenit arva b'mea tabaot. What if you have a ring of an idol worship that fell into another 100 rings? V'naflu shtayim mehen liyam hagadol. And 2 rings. One is not enough. One is just considered too small. But if 2 rings fall out into the Mediterranean Sea, so you lost 2 of the rings, you can't throw them away, obviously, by hand, but if they fell away and they got lost, hutru kulan, then the rest of the rings become permitted. Sha'ani omer, because I can assume, otah hatabat hayta bichlal hashtayim, that prohibited ring was in those 2. For purposes of leniency, sometimes you can say if they got lost, it was there. Nit arva b'meya. But let's say the ring of idol worship got mixed into 100 rings, v'nit chalku. Now they didn't fall away and get lost. Now they got split. Arba'im l'makom echad, v'shishim l'makom acher. 40 to one place, 60 to the other. So there's what's called a majority and a minority. V'naflu ha'arba'im kulan l'taba'ot acherot. If the 40, which is the minority, fell into another mixture of rings, kulan mutarot. They're all permitted. Sha'ani omer, because I can say, otah ha'tabat ha'asura barovhi. The prohibited ring is in the majority. Majority has a very major power in halacha. So if there's 60 rings, we can safely assume that the bad ring is over there, and these 40 which fell into another mixture, those are all permitted. Naflu hashishim letabaot acherot. But if the 60, which has the majority, would have fallen into another ring, kulan asurot, they're all prohibited. Now why? Isn't this a double doubt? The ring fell into the 60 fell into others. Says the Kesef Mishnah, the primary commentator here, he says what's called a rule, chazakah de isura beruba ite. The presumption of the prohibition is in the majority. Typically, you have one ring falls into the 60. If one of the 60 fell into somewhere else, then we can assume there's a double doubt in this mixture. Probably maybe the bad ring stayed in that original mixture of 60, and so there's no problem. But if the entire 60, the entire prohibited mixture, fell into another mixture, so you can assume that the bad ring is somewhere still here, there's no double doubt. Halacha Yud Aleph, ha'asherah, the prohibited idol tree that was used in idol worship. Bein shahayta ne'evedet, whether it itself was served, bein shahayta avodat kochavim munachat tachteha, or if the idol was just placed under it, so it became like a shade for the idol. Asur leshev b'tzel komata. You cannot sit in the shade of this tree, of the trunk. Umutar leshev b'tzel hasarigim v'ha'alim shalah, but you could sit in the shade of the branches and its leaves. V'im yesh lo derech acheret, if you have another path to walk by this tree. Asur lo la'avor tachteha. You cannot pass by under it. Some people, because of this, when you have non-kosher restaurants that have an awning, they don't want to go under the awning. Try to go around it if they can. If there's no other way, over tachteha kishahuratz, then you should go under it, but running as fast as you can. Halacha yud bet. Efrochim shekinenu ba. What happens if you have chicks or birds that nested in this tree? Ve'ein tzrichin li'iman. But they don't need their mother, they're older already. Mutarin, you can have pleasure, you can use those birds. V'ha'efrochim v'ha'bitzim shetzrichin li'iman. But young chicks or eggs that still need their mother, asurin. They're prohibited. Why? Shahari ashera kemo basis lahem. Because the tree is like their base. And it's supporting them, so they're prohibited. V'hakan atzma shebirosha. But the nest itself, the wood that was made for the nest, mutar, is permitted. Naturally, we know birds bring their wood for their nest from elsewhere. They don't build it from this tree, so the nest itself is permitted. Let's say you cracked off some wood from this Asherah tree, asurim bahana'a. They cannot be used for benefit. And therefore, hisik bahen at hatanur. If you use them to heat up your oven, you can't bake bread in there. Yutzan. You have to first cool it off. And then you can heat it up with new wood, permitted wood, and bake in it. But let's say you would have baked the bread without cooling it off. So now part of the heat that contributed to baking this bread was prohibited. So the bread becomes prohibited as well. But if the bread gets mixed into other loaves of bread, here we don't say that the entire mixture becomes forbidden. Why? Because the bread itself wasn't used as an idol. It was just baked with the power of idol worship. So therefore what you do is, yolich dmei otah hapat li'am hamelach, the worth of that loaf of bread, you should bring to the Dead Sea and destroy it, kedei shelo yehaneh ba, so you don't have pleasure from it, ush'ar hakikarot mutarin, and the rest of the loaves are permitted. Halacha yudalid natal mimena karkar. Let's say you take a piece of wood from this tree, and you made it into a karkar, which is a shuttle. They used to weave clothing, right? You see how they used to weave? It's called the warp. Strings going this way. And then you had a round piece of wood which you wrapped around the thread, and you would throw it this way and that way, called the woof. It would go up and down, or weft. There's two different words. Yeah, either woof or weft.
Weft and the warp.
That's right. So if you took a piece of wood and you made it into the shuttle around which you wrap the thread to weave the garment, and you wove the garment with it, asur bahana'a. It's prohibited now. The piece of clothing is prohibited. If the clothing got mixed into other clothes, so same thing over here, you take the money, the worth of this piece of clothing, and you destroy it. The rest of the clothing are permitted. Why? Because they weren't used themselves for idols. Umutar, says the Rambam, it's permitted to plant vegetables under the tree. Whether in the summertime, where they need shade. So in this way, the idol tree is giving them shade. Ben bimot hagshamim, or the winter time. Why? Mipnei shetzel ha'ashera shehu asur. Im hakarka she'ena ne'aseret, because it's a combination. It's the shade of the tree that's prohibited, but the ground is also part of the growth process, and that's permitted. Gormin li rakot elu litzmoach. Together, they're causing the vegetables to grow, and we have a principle: v'chol shadavar asur. V'davar mutar, gormin lo, if you have a prohibited and a permitted object that are causing something else to happen, hareza mutar b'chol makom, it's always permitted. That's called zeva ze gorem. This one and that one is causing, it's permitted. Lefichach, therefore, two other cases that are permitted for the same reason. Sadeh shezibla bezevel avodat kochavim. If you fertilize the field with idol fertilizer, mutar lizroa ota, you could now plant in this field, because there's two elements, the ground and the fertilizer. Upara shepitma bekarshinei avodat kochavim, or if you have a cow which you fed fodder, animal food that was used in idol worship, teachel, you can eat the cow. Why? Because the cow also ate other foods, permitted foods. And same thing in all similar cases. Halacha tedvav, number 15. Basar o yain o perot, meat, wine, fruit, produce. She'echinum lahakrivam la'avodat kochavim, that were prepared. They weren't actually brought. They were just designated to be brought as an idol, in service of idol worship. Lo ne'asru b'hana'ah, they haven't become yet prohibited to have benefit from them. Afal pisha yichnisum lebet avodat kochavim, even though they brought them into the church or into the house of worship, it's still not prohibited. Ad she'akrivum lefanah, only till they bring it. They actually offer it to the idol. Hikrivum lefanah, once they offered it, na'asuti krovet, they have become an offering. Va'afal pisha chazru v'hotziyum, and even if they take it out of the house of worship, hare'ilu asurim le'olam, they're prohibited forever. L'chol hanimtza bebeit avodat kochavim, anything which is found in the house of worship of an idol, afilu mayim umelach, even if it's innocent water and salt, nothing seemingly problematic, asur b'hana'ah min haTorah, it's biblically prohibited to have benefit from it. And if you eat even the slightest amount, you get lashes. Typically for eating bad things, prohibited things, has to be a kazayit, an olive size. Here, even the smallest size is prohibited. If you find clothes or other utensils or money, birosh avodat kochavim, on the head of an idol. And we're going to see this is talking about not in a house of worship, but outside, somewhere random. There's a statue standing on the street, and there's money on the head of it, or a piece of clothing. If you found it in an embarrassing way, that's permitted. Obviously, if someone was making fun of the idol, they weren't worshiping it. But if it's there in an honorable way, that's prohibited. What's an example of this? If you find a purse or a wallet hanging on its neck, or a piece of clothing folded but on its head, it looks weird. Or a basket, overturned on its head. That's all permitted because it's in a way of embarrassment. Anything similar to that. But if you find on its head something which typically you would bring on an altar, then it's prohibited. You can assume it was used for the idol. When does this distinction apply? If you found all these things outside the place where the idol is normally worshipped. But if you find it in a house of worship, doesn't matter how it was placed, honorably or degradingly, or if it was fit for sacrifice or not. If it's in the house of worship, it's prohibited, even water and salt. The idols of Peor, which you go to the bathroom in front of, or the ones you throw stones at, anything found near them, bein bifnim, bein bachutz, inside or outside, asur b'hana'ah, is prohibited. Why? Because these idols originally were embarrassing things were done to it. So you can't assume anything that's embarrassing is good, because the whole point of Peor was to do embarrassing things. The chen avnei markul is also the stones that were thrown to this Avodah Zarah, and then hanir et shehi imo, if the stone appears to have been together with the idol, asur b'hana'ah, it's prohibited. Halacha Yud Zayin. Avodat kochavim shehayala merchatz ogina. An idol that attached to it was a bathhouse or a garden. It kind of belonged to the idol. Nehanim bahem, you can have benefit from them, shelo b'tova. But you cannot pay what's called appreciation, not the regular salary you go into, but apparently like an extra amount of money to help it in its growth or upkeep or whatever. But you cannot have pleasure if you're required to give this payment called tova. If the bathhouse was jointly owned by the idol and by other people, you can have pleasure from it even if you give appreciation to the priests, so long as you don't actually pay for the use of this merchatz or the gina. Halacha Yudchet. Merchatz sheyesh ba avodat kochavim. If you have a bathhouse and inside the bathhouse there's an idol standing, mutar l'rchotz ba, you can bathe in it. Because certainly this statue was made just for beauty and not to be served. Because it says that it had to be their gods. Only if they treat them like a god. Not when they embarrass it, stand there naked in front of it. It's an embarrassing thing to the idol. So it wouldn't be an idol. If you have an idol that's on the edge of the sewer pipe, everyone urinates over there. It's an embarrassment. It's not an idol. But if the way you served it was that way, then of course, asur lekanezbo, you can't go in there. Final halacha for today, halacha yutet. Sakin shel avodat kochavim. If you have a knife that was used in idol worship, sheshachat ba, and you used it to slaughter something else, harez mutar, it's permitted. Because the act that you did was a destructive act. You killed an animal. But if the animal was in danger and so it was going to die anyways, then actually if you slaughter the animal, it's prohibited because you're doing an act of fixing. Had you let it die, you couldn't eat from it. Now that you slaughtered it, you're going to have some good supper tonight. And this fixing was done by using pleasure, by deriving benefit from an accessory of an idol. You also can't cut meat with the knife because you're fixing the meat. But if you're just cutting and smashing and destroying it in a way that causes loss, then mutar, then it's permitted because you haven't done a beneficial act.